Hello and welcome. We're kind of at the end of AW, and I don't want to waste a lot of time. This talk I've given before, and it can take up to an hour. I can do it in less than a half hour and maybe 15 minutes, and I'm going to go really fast. But I'll try to hit the salient points. Mostly, I want to talk about kind of what we're doing beyond the hands, interacting in VR space. I spent a lot of time this year building out things like avatars, mixed reality, and I just want to talk a little bit about what I've learned. A quick survey of the tech out there, and I've got like a million slides, so I'll go through them very quickly. But just to give you a quick sense of like what's out there, what we can see in the next year or so, and definitely what's possible in terms of social interaction. So that's a lot of topics in a 15-minute period, and it's not a lot, so we're going to go fast. Just real quick, what I just covered, some of the things we're going to cover. It's mostly the peripherals, mostly the different types of interactions we might see in VR space. A little bit of VR social, because that's like what we're going to do with it. It's like, how do we do it? Why do we do it? And what might we use it for? There we go. A little bit more back. Since I only have 15 minutes, I'm going to go quick. I used to make games here in the Bay Area, 12 years doing that. I've been teaching out on the East Coast for about 9. I've got my own company, WrenAR, and I've also been working with an awesome company in DC, Notion Theory, and we do a lot of contract client work for AR and VR. First game. At a college, I was making a fictional war in Korea. Imagine that. Made a lot of Sims games. Made a Warhammer game working at Namco. But kind of, where I got to this, obviously we had a lot of authors, sci-fi authors, and these aren't the only ones, but a lot of them, that kind of drew out this picture of what it's going to be like to interact in VR space in the future. And so I grew up, in college at least, I was reading the Gibson and the Stevenson novels. And then just a couple years ago, we got another one that's like pretty much in this, it might as well have followed like the same year as these other ones in terms of the content and kind of how it drew a picture of the future and the internet and whatnot. So we get Ready Player One, we've got Steven Spielberg making movies now about it. So it's out there, but all of these are like really dark pictures of the future. I don't have that. I'm very optimistic. I have a lot of like just very positive thinking about how we're going to use this technology to interact. And so we think about why we're doing this. We've got this content, like, okay, here we are now. This Earth, this is like the worst graphic ever, by the way, but in the middle we've got the Earth. And that's kind of like where I see a lot of people charging towards. They're charging towards trying to get to this idea of real, this idea of like, I'm in VR or I'm in AR, and I feel like everything's real. I feel like the touch interactions, I feel like, just being in the presence of another person in the room feels right. And my point of this whole talk is that that's really just the baseline, and we're going to get there pretty quick. I really feel like that's less than a 5-year timeline before we kind of get to that point where you put on a headset or you put on a whatever, and you're going to a meeting across the entire planet, halfway around the world, and it's better than being there. And I really feel like we're going to get there pretty quick. Just with the tech, and you've seen a ton of the tech just here at the show today that kind of points in that direction. And it's really just a matter of refining that and stitching that together, because I think most of that tech is kind of come a long way. And so it really starts with the senses. So as we as humans try to interact in the world, we're talking about senses, sight, sound, etc. Sight, we're pushing pretty heavy towards bigger FOVs, bigger pixel density, definitely. If you're going to do coding or anything like with a headset on, you kind of need that. The lenses have got to be better in terms of like collimated light and all these great things. Frame rates, obviously that was important a couple years ago, but we're kind of solving that problem. But as we move to mobile, we have to think about different ways to kind of improve that. And then we're getting beyond the visual spectrum. We saw a few years ago, Mateo showed up with like thermal, right? We had thermal in our headset. How cool is that? And then beyond that, we're starting to see IR and just other beyond human sight, right? So superpower, the whole theme here is superpowers, right? And these are definitely superpowers that we're giving to people. And then all of this kind of transitions from this VR and MR. Like Microsoft doesn't even talk about AR or VR anymore. It's just MR, right? And I think that's going to kind of be the trend as we move forward. So we think about the kind of things that we're going to see moving forward with sight, all kinds of cool stuff. We've got thermal, obviously I just talked about, but depth sensing, trying to scan the environment, trying to see what's out there in terms of not just the visual spectrum, but other things. We've got ways to optimize with retinal foveal projection. We've got, maybe down the road, we've got in the bottom right here, you see like it's a cochlear implant. They've basically bypassed the audio, the whole normal biological audio mechanism in order to solve a lot of different types of deafness. And I really feel like we're not too far. I'd say less than 10 years from really doing that with vision as well. Sound, there's a great company out of Maryland. I'm from DC area. I didn't talk a lot about myself, but I'm from the DC area. And Visisonics is based out of there, and they have a really great product that starts to think about the magic sauce is like thinking about the room and how sound bounces off those walls and things and then enters your ear, and the shape of your ear is important. And we're starting to get away from stereo and back into binaural audio because we're starting to find that that actually enhances these VR experiences quite a bit, makes them more real to us. Touch, this is a glove we built at Notion Theory in DC, recent one with the Vive tracker puck, but we're working with flex sensors, working all sorts of things. But when we think about the value of this, I go back to this AT&T tagline, which is reach out and touch someone, right? And AT&T used to charge something like, it was like $150 for like a 5-minute phone call. It was insane, right? But it was that value of connecting with somebody else that was like halfway across the country that was worth, you know, we didn't like paying the price, but we paid it because it was that valuable to us. And it's that idea of that's how important these senses are, and enhancing those communication channels when we can't be there are. If you can't go to a meeting or you can't see somebody that you care about. So touch is important. We've seen a ton of work in the gloves. Look at all these gloves. This is even a small subset of the ones that are out there, but these are some of the bigger ones. Everybody's working on gloves, right? Because we want to touch things in VR and AR. These are some ones that we made at Notion Theory. One's like kind of an Iron Man model that kind of vibrated when you kind of charged it up and then shot things. We've been working on like some more really sensitive touch, variable strength touch as we kind of reach out and grab things in VR space, AR space. This one showed up not too long ago at GDC, I think. It's a really elegant solution, just Bluetooth, and it's got kind of a magnet that pushes against your finger. Ultra haptics, you can test it, not anymore, but you could have tested it today or yesterday. It's a pretty cool sonic solution to trying to create shapes and other things that you can reach out and touch without any kind of peripheral other than the pad that you have to kind of move your hand over. These are some experiments I did over the last year. I started off with the ISS demo on the left and started playing around. I was trying to do liquid in space. You see astronauts like drinking water or whatever in space. And so I made these little globules, and they started to feel like jellyfish. So I said, okay, I'll make them into jellyfish. And so somewhere around Thanksgiving last year, I made jellyfish. And I made this underwater demo, and then I turned it into this thing around Christmas last year called Rainbow Jellies. And it was I threw it up on like WrenAR, and like 10,000 people downloaded it. And I'm like, really? That's cool. I mean, I had fun making it, but it was really just, I was trying to work with, the revelation here was soft bodies. I wasn't doing cubes, and I wasn't doing spheres. I was doing these soft bodies that you interacted with using your hands, in this case, the leap motion. And that soft body interaction was really powerful to me. And I would go out and demo this to people. And what blew my mind was that I added sight and I added sound to it, so it changes colors when you touch it, right? And it makes sounds when you touch it. And there's no haptic glove or anything involved, but over half the people that demoed this came away saying their fingers were tingling afterwards, right? They touched these jellyfish and their fingers were tingling. And that was just kind of an aha moment for me to say there's a pathway there to getting to those kind of touch interactions without necessarily putting anything on your hands. Just recently, I did this thing for USens, just actually for this conference. But this idea that we can really get in there without actually having gloves on our hands necessarily to work with it. Tactical haptics does a cool thing with strafe haptics, gives you a real sense of weight built into your controllers. We saw Cornell do something similar to that. Soft robotics I'm a big fan of. I really feel like this is a big future in terms of VR-AR interaction. Having all kinds of like weird exoskeletons get a little bit cumbersome, and there's a lot of work in soft robotics that I think is going to aid this industry quite a bit in terms of interaction within VR space. The one in the middle, it's kind of a glove holding a cube. That's kind of it's a soft robotic bionic hand that was made at Harvard. Really cool. Gives you, superhuman strength. Here we are with superpowers again, right? But again, we can use this in VR and AR space to kind of interact with objects. And I think the soft nature and what they're figuring out in that industry is really going to aid us a lot in terms of making it less cumbersome, just like we're trying to minimize the form factor of our headsets. Likewise, the peripherals are going to kind of come down to something that is almost imperceptible. This one's kind of cool. This one's starting to actually read. I don't know how well it works. I haven't tried it, but at least as far as the internet tells me, it looks pretty cool. It's actually using like a gel and reading muscle information. It also gives muscle information, so it can make your hand actually contract and feel weight and that sort of thing. So there's something there. This one came out not too long ago, I think right around GDC timeframe. This idea that, again, we're doing actually just like if you had physical therapy and you're trying to rehabilitate a muscle, it's those kind of pads that you're putting on your arms that are combined with some decent computer programming, giving you a sense of weight when you pick up and move things. Solely, you probably heard of from Google. Again, we got no hand interactions. We've got no gloves or anything else. It's just using radar waves basically to interpret really micro movements of your hand. Really powerful. I think we'll see a big future in that. Where's all this headed? Why is it important? Virtual handshakes, right? This idea that you can go across the planet, go to a business meeting, and not just see them. It's not FaceTime, it's not Skype, but you can actually reach out, shake their hand, and actually have that feel like a real human interaction. Moving on, we get suits, right? Just like we saw in Ready Player One, just like we saw with Gibson and Stevenson, we're starting to see these suits show up, right? Tesla started doing not just like the haptic feedback with the servo motors, but also like heat and cold, right? So these are sensations that we want to encourage going forward. Skinterface had a cool solution using sound waves moving a magnet against your skin to kind of have a sense of touch. Subtank is kind of a lighter weight solution. It's mostly just sound waves, kind of like a subwoofer on your back, but it actually integrates with music really well if you have like a nice beat matcher or equalizer. We tried this one at Notion Theory Hardlight. We had it for a couple weeks and tried it. It's got directional haptics, which is kind of cool. So if you get hit like with a sword, you can actually feel it kind of move across your body. And that was kind of interesting. Not quite there yet. None of those are really quite there. But they're getting there, and it's getting cool. And so when we get to the final state of that, we're starting to think about, okay, not just handshakes, but maybe virtual hugs. Maybe you have somebody across the country that you haven't seen in a long time. Not just FaceTime with them, but you can actually reach out and hug them, right? And that's great on a touch front, but let's take it a step further. Start thinking about smell. Maybe we start integrating some of the smells of that person. Maybe you've recorded the smells of that person. Now they're being excreted, or I don't know what they call it, anyway, vaporized around like your experience. And so you're really getting a sense like you were there, right? You're at your grandma's house and you remember the smell of that when you were a kid, and reach out and touch someone, right? You're right there. This isn't new stuff. It's stuff we've been doing forever, and it's just kind of finding its way back now that we've kind of got the tools to deal with VR and AR in a better way. Olfactory bulb. Smell is really important because it goes way back in terms of our power of memory. It's the first sensory organ that develops in the brain. It's the one that has the deepest and longest lasting memories. And so it's a hard one to get at with VR, but it's actually one of the most important for us to go after. Here's one example. FeelReal went after this with heat and wind on this mask that attached to your headset. Nosulus Rift, I don't know why I want to talk about this, but anyway. Ubisoft came out with this thing that actually made fart smells in VR. Why you want that, I don't know. And unfortunately, this is like the first one that came out, right? So if you want to introduce the VR and AR world to smell, this is not the best way to go about it. But nonetheless, interesting. This is one of my favorite. University of Tokyo put together a method by which they, through an AR camera, are recognizing a QR code on a cookie. It turns their basic like shortbread cookie into strawberry or chocolate or whatever. At the same time, they're feeding you some smells through your nose, and your brain does the math, fills in the blanks, and all of a sudden you're eating a lemon cookie or a chocolate cookie. Okay, so it's not perfect, but you know what? It's starting to point a path towards the fact that we can actually short-circuit some of these mechanisms and get at them. Movement. How much time left? A couple minutes? 2. Okay, I'll go as fast as I can. We're trying to figure out how do we move people around in VR airspace without having them actually move, right? Cables are great because they give you a sense of acceleration. We've got gimbals all over. If you've been to any trade show, besides this one doesn't have a lot of gimbals, but if you've been to South by Southwest or E3 or any of these things, you've seen a lot of these gimbals showing up, showing off how we move people around with a headset on. We've got treadmills trying to simulate people running and walking. There's Palmer Luckey getting some exercise. Verzoom's been fantastic. If you haven't tried this, it's an excellent way to kind of you kind of lose sight of the fact that you're pedaling to drive a tank or fly a Pegasus or something, and it feels really natural. And so there's something to that. There's a sweat problem with VR and AR that we have to figure out, but nonetheless, it's still pretty cool. This one blew my mind. Framestore comes out with this thing called the Mars Bus this last year, where they put students on a bus and all the windows are LCDs, showing off basically a synchronized landscape. So as the bus drives around, it's actually driving around Mars. Just an awesome location-based experience. Redirected walking is kind of taking us out of these smaller spaces into bigger ones, using just some basic math to kind of shift the world as you're walking around. We've experimented with this at Notion Theory. It works. It's great. You have to do some tricks to kind of fool people, but it absolutely works. And then not moving at all. Samsung came out with a cool pair of headphones that uses just sound waves to simulate you moving through space, messing with the vestibular cortex of your ear, the semicircular canals, and making you feel like you're moving when you're not actually moving. How cool is that? I think this is really early in terms of what's possible here, but moving without moving is a pretty cool thing to do with this space. Tons of work in the scanning space. It's supposed to be animated, but anyway, we got Bridge in the middle there. Things like we've seen things like Matterport. Tango, we've got, I think it's a Lenovo. There's definitely an Asus phone and I think a Lenovo phone that both have Tango tech, and we'll see a lot more of those over the next few years. Just about everything is going to have some kind of depth sensing in it within a year or two. Saw this at CES in the Intel booth. HypeVR comes out with this really cool 360 walk-around video. It's 360 video, but all of a sudden it's not just look around, but you can actually move within that space and see some sense of parallax and depth of field. Points the way towards where we're going to be looking at video down the road. This idea that so many people are scanning. Google just talked about this at I/O, but they're starting to think about scanning interior spaces, not just Google Maps, not satellites looking down, not cars driving around, but actually people walking around scanning insides of buildings, and you having interior Google Maps to walk around. And that's important for, those are all play spaces. Those are all interactive spaces for VR and AR. Backpack's kind of a short-term solution. Don't want to spend too much time on it, but pretty cool. Once you cut the wires, you get to do a lot. When you make avatars in VR, one thing I learned, especially with the current headsets, you've got a head, you've got hands, and you've got feet. And one of the problems is everything in between is kind of like jelly. And that's why I like this Pinocchio model, because you've got strings attached to the hands and the head. They have to be where they are. They're tracked objects, but the middle isn't. And so, I built a robot. I took the Kyle, the Unity robot, and threw him in there just with this basic IK rig just to see what would happen. Later on, I put him in there with a full IK rig, basketball, tried him out. Put him in the jellyfish demo just to see what that did. And then I said, I don't want to do a robot anymore. I want to do something else. So my first step was, okay, let me get a real person. And so I went on Sketchfab and I found this scanned model, this guy Arnaud. I have no idea who he is, but I found his model and I demoed it a lot this year. This guy Arnaud. And I rigged, same rig as the robot. It took me no time at all. It took me less than 5 minutes to find it on Sketchfab, pull it down, rig it, get it in Unity, and have it animated. And the sense of presence was insane. I always put mirrors in my demos because looking at yourself in VR is really weird and awesome. And it just makes you feel like there's a sense of presence there when you have a rigged IK avatar that's really unprecedented. There's something there that's really valuable. Hover Junkers really pointed the way with just an awesome Vive game that had excellent IK, and they use this final IK plug-in for Unity that's fantastic. And so I put it all together with Leap Motion. I got Vive controllers strapped to my feet, so I had full body all of a sudden. Now I can move my feet. I can play soccer. How cool is that, right? So I have full body VR with feet. I started doing soccer demos, basketball demos, you name it. You can bounce the ball, you can kick the ball, you can drop kick the ball. I don't know of anybody else that can do that, but it's a cool experience when you have just that full range of motion, right? That picture was from MIT. We demoed it at their tech showcase. Different solutions about how to make those foot controllers. Here's the soccer demo again. Started getting into mixed reality, just this idea of getting other people involved in these VR demos. So you give these demos, whether it's AR or VR, and other people are just kind of watching you look like a fool. Well, if you can actually get yourself in there and they can see you in that environment, it's a lot more engaging. Even better so if you can get them involved in that process where they can aid or kind of contribute to the experience. Real quick, I'm almost out of time here. So social, where's this all going? 23 years ago, I was doing this stuff. I was making VRML chat rooms, right? We didn't have headsets, we didn't have any of this good stuff, but we were making 3D avatars in chat rooms. Then we get to like the modern day, right? Absorb this for a second. Modern day, AltSpace. I was super disappointed when I saw AltSpace. Not because it didn't have some cool tech behind it, but because visually it was really a baby step at best from where I was 20 plus years ago. And that's kind of where I felt. And we've seen a lot of companies since then kind of try to up the ante in terms of visuals. But by and large, the interactions in social space have really been limited. This is my favorite of the bunch, big screen, because you can actually use each other's screen. It's actually a decent development environment. Anyway, VTime's pretty good because it automates a lot of this process and simplifies the avatars. It's good for 4 people. Rec Room has all kinds of cool games that you can play, these cool quests now. Sansar is really trying to get high fidelity, and speaking of high fidelity, there's high fidelity. Both these companies kind of spawned from the same source, but they're both after the same goal of trying to create a really realistic social environment. Then Oculus comes out this year, and they had like 4 or 5 stages of it. In the top left, we see Carmack's first example, which was just like these cube heads. Then we got these weird ghostly heads that I didn't really like very much. But then they eventually got to these kind of cartoony avatars, and they got the ability to pull in your social graph and pull in all of your cool media. And that really changed kind of like the nature of being online and social, because it wasn't just you and avatars, but it was you, avatars, and by the way, your real life, and some of these things that were being pulled in, pictures and friends and sounds and other things from the internet. We see Tencent kind of moving this space with WeChat. Obviously, they've got WeChat. They're coming out with a headset. They're going to be competing in that space. Eye tracking is really important for a lot of reasons. We've got things like foveated rendering, which are going to, we got the people talking about Snapdragon 835. Oh my gosh, it's so fast. Well, imagine if it was 3 times faster because we're, tracking the eyes and doing foveated rendering. We got a few HMDs out there that are doing it. We're starting to see it. The new Qualcomm one I'm really excited about. Magic Leap, obviously getting into light field. We haven't seen their product, but we anticipate it's going to be good. Avegant showed us one this year. That's pretty cool. I was hoping they'd be at this show. They didn't show up and demo, but I'm looking forward to that one. And then we had a bunch of people in the last 2 years really started getting into location-based. And this really kind of is the most forward-leaning view of what we can do in AR and VR space. Because they have these fixed locations, they can do a lot more in terms of controlling that experience, in terms of your sights, in terms of your sounds, in terms of everything else. And we saw a lot of these great ones. Obviously, the Void out there. They got burnt marshmallows when you fry the marshmallow man. That's pretty cool. Zero Latency is doing more of a shoot 'em up down in Australia, but still pretty cool. Of note that they're using PlayStation 3 tech to do all their tracking. Universal down in Orlando is doing a haunted house. IMAX just opened up their theater this year with all kinds of just Vive port and Vive, Steam kind of projects. And so we get to this point, end of 2018, we need to get rid of the wires. We need to have things like eye tracking. We need to have facial tracking. I really feel like by next year, if you don't have all this stuff, why bother playing? Because this is what people are asking for. They want to get, the wires suck. We need to get rid of those. Tracking out and about needs to happen. We need better resolution. We need, we're going to start to see more and more predictive interface. It's going to remove the need for a lot of these devices that we use to interact in VR, in the AR space. Obviously, we're going to get smaller form factors down to like a pair of sunglasses. And I really feel like in less than 5 years, we're at a point where you're wearing a headset, you're wearing a pair of glasses, and why bother taking it off? Why would you take it off? There's too much awesome information by leaving it on. And as much as that seems maybe too soon, 5 years, we think about cell phones and other things, and I really feel like it's going to come on faster than we think. And so I think full-time VR, AR kind of headsets are going to be pretty common. Less than 10 years, but definitely maybe as close as 5. So we look at some of the stuff coming out in the next year. We've got some great headsets. You saw a lot of them at the show today. But we're getting lighter form factors. The wires obviously are gone. And we've got a lot of players fighting for this space because they all know that it's fighting for that real estate on your face, right? And so we get to this thing where we're at human powers, right? We're trying to get to that baseline of what can we do? Can we match all these things of what we are as human beings in a VR or AR environment? And then we get beyond that. And that's really the most important question is what happens at that moment when we've done it, okay? We've recreated at least a very human experience of going somewhere else and being with someone else. And then what kind of interactions happen beyond that point? Those are unknowns. Almost across the board, those are unknowns. Those are human interactions that are beyond our current understanding of what we're capable of. And they can't happen until we kind of get to that baseline. But we're not far from it. My point is, I think we're really less than 5 years from that, of that baseline. And so everything that happens beyond that is kind of superhuman interaction. And that's what I'm here for, and that's what I do, and that's why I'm doing VR, is because I want to see what's kind of beyond all that. So with that, I want to finish up and just say thank you very much for your time. And